Hello, everyone. Welcome to this final intern talk by Jeremy Hyrkas. He was with us over the summer working on binaural audio, and he's a PhD student at the University of California, San Diego, and was co-mentored by myself and Hong Sodoma, who's also on the call. So, Jeremy, please take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. This is a talk on this research project. We're calling it Binaural Spatial Audio Positioning in Video Calls. And as Hannes mentioned, so I'm Jeremy, Hannes from the MSR Audio and Acoustics Group, and Hong from the Teams Audio Group are my mentors. So briefly about me, I'm actually currently at the University of San Diego. In our grad offices here. I'm a PhD student in computer music, which basically just means that I research audio technology with a focus on music creation. And broadly, I've had some research interests in corpus-based audio synthesis, which can include machine learning methods, psychoacoustic controls for audio synthesis, and spatial audio, which is the focus of the subject matter of today. So largely what we're talking about today, what we're interested in is video call systems. So we all know them, we're on them right now. Obviously, we've had a massive increase in use in 2020, many examples, Skype, Teams, Zoom, FaceTime, Google Meet. Jitsi is a open source, or at least non-commercial video call service. A lot of times the focus is on connecting isolated callers, although of course there's situations such as this one right now, where there's many of us isolated on our laptops with our headphones and also at least one conference room connected. And in most of these cases, we have all these individual video streams coming in, but the audio tends to be monophonic. So everyone's audio signal is all mixed down together into one channel and delivered that way. But there is interest at the moment in incorporating spatial audio into these video call systems. And just to, not to get too in depth into it, but spatial audio we'll say is a way of rendering audio such that sound streams sound like they're coming from particular positions in space. And there's various ways to do this, but that's one way to think about spatial audio. And so why would we want to do this in teleconferencing systems? So one thing about spatial audio is that it turns out to be very important in speech intelligibility. So we can go all the way back to the psychoacoustics problem of the cocktail party problem, which you might describe as humans' ability to focus on one audio stream or one speaker in a room, or listen to some sound in a room full of other sounds happening, and how do we isolate and focus on one sound? And it turns out that sounds coming from sources in space tends to be really important for this. So we have a concept called the spatial release from masking, which is one of the components of this, which is when you're trying to listen to some target sound, and you've got all these other sounds around you that may distract you or make that sound harder to hear, as those sounds are separated in space and come to you from different positions, becomes easier for us to focus on and understand and follow that sound source. And this turns out to be really important for speech signals. So this is, one way that spatial audio is related to intelligibility. And it actually turns out, this is something that will become more and more relevant as the talk goes on, that the benefits of spatial release from masking, basically, separating sources, how far you separate them. Here, just to look back at this example here. So here's a target and a masker separated by about a 90-degree angle. But it turns out that you see the most benefits of separation in the first 45 degrees. That's particularly true for speech. So the idea here being that there's in this particular problem, there's some evidence that the early stages of separation give you a lot of intelligibility benefits. So, and this is just spatial audio as it relates to some form of intelligibility metric for speech. Now, there has been a lot of research into spatial audio and teleconferencing, particularly back to audio-only teleconferencing. So all the way back in 2001, when computer monitors looked like this, there's a kind of a landmark study on the effects of spatial audio on these teleconferencing systems. So here the test was listening to conversations between 4 people. There's pictures here. There's actually no video. And the conversations would be all monophonic coming out of one speaker. This is like what you would hear in a video call system today. What they would call sort of a shallow spatial audio, which actually you see in the figure on the right here. So this is all over loudspeakers, but this is each person getting their own individual speaker, really at a pretty small separation. And then they also not pictured as they have some conditions that are very wide. And what they found in these scenarios was that spatial audio helped listeners in speaker identification or remembering who said what, and also in focal assurance, which is sort of related to attention and confidence and listening effort type of things. And interestingly, in this case, they found that spatializing, even a shallow spatialization, again, gave you a big benefit, and then increasing more, not so much. It'll be obvious why I bring up this theme as we continue. Now, this is over sound in a room. One thing of note is, of course, there's spatial audio over headphones, and how you render that is slightly different. There is a pretty recent study that says that spatial audio, again, in audio-only teleconferencing is associated with a laundry list of positive benefits for listeners that I'll just sort of list off here from the study of, the overall quality perception of the call and speaker recognition and self-assessed confidence and listening effort, and the perception of the connection quality, which is interesting, comprehension effort, concentration effort, intelligibility. So all these very positive benefits for listening to audio-only calls, spatialized over headphones. Now the caveat here, I'm not going super in depth into this, but over headphones, the way that we tend to do spatial audio, the way that we're looking at now is delivered in what we'd call rendered using a binaural format, which for headphone users will essentially try to give you same clues that your ears would get in a room of sound is coming from certain directions. In this study, what they were using was binaural audio plus what's called head tracking, which is if you can monitor someone's head position as you turn your head, the position of the sounds can turn with you, which is what would happen in a real room. A sound that's in front of you, you're turning your head to your right, and you'll hear it from your right ear. This is often, doing head tracking is often hardware dependent or maybe software dependent, but it's generally not available in most cases. So we have to be a little careful about the benefits that we expect to get from spatial audio if we don't have head tracking. So this is all, this is a very, very brief sample of spatial audio research in teleconferencing with audio only. Now, the situation does change a little bit in video calls, which is what we're looking at. So just for example, there's some early work, 2010 actually, from our colleagues here at MSR, on what are the benefits of adding spatial audio to teleconferencing, and also what are the benefits of adding video. So what happens when you spatialize audio, but also what happens when you add video to the conversation. And actually, to very briefly summarize, what was found was in metrics of intelligibility and understanding the conversation and following, adding the video essentially overshadowed all the effects, or adding the video was so strong that the spatial audio didn't show up as much in this study, which is actually kind of an intuitive results for when we think about how we follow conversations and how we converse and experience the world. For those without visual impairments, at least, being able to see the person speaking really helps a lot. Now, I only bring this up. I'm editorializing a little bit, but I believe this gives me at least some insight into why, as we jump into video calls, we see so much engineering effort into video call systems, and the audio stays monophonic. There's more to it than that, but the video benefits are so huge that it's only now we're going, okay, yeah, let's go back and revisit this spatial audio question that we have evidence works in at least audio only calls. And there is some recent work that does point towards this. So when asking people to follow one conversation while there is another conversation happening, this recent study found that having the videos helps, and having the spatial audio helps you follow that conversation, as long as the audio of the speaker that you're trying to follow is aligned in the same hemisphere as the video of the speaker you're trying to follow, which is another fairly intuitive result, but it's a nice proven result. So the spatial audio can help you if you have the alignment correct. And there is also recent work into the experience of spatial audio for remote users in a hybrid meeting. So, for example, me right now watching the conference room with the audio team, and if I had spatial audio for their room versus mono audio, or even binaural with head tracking, how would it affect my experience of understanding if they were talking instead of me right now? And because this happened during COVID, they also checked about masked versus unmasked participants, which actually would be half relevant right now. And just to briefly summarize, we've got this. They found that comprehension for the remote listener did help if the audio was spatialized to sort of match the visual layout of the room. So we're moving back into looking at spatial audio benefits in teleconferencing, but there is generally still a lot of open questions, not only about what will help, but also how to do it. So, for example, for a remote user, now remote here, what we're focused on is someone like myself sitting in front of a laptop using headphones. How might you even position sound signals spatially? This is kind of an open question, although a very relevant one. So one thing that you might do is try to position the audio stream based on your perception of where the corresponding videos are located. So let's say you're on a call, you're watching me on the left talking with Andy Wilson on the right. Hi, Andy, I think he's here. And you're watching us talk. And one thing you might do is say, okay, you've got a user that's watching, a screen of some size from some distance. And let's take the middle of each video screen, for example, and put that, and we can try to draw an angle of where we think the center of the videos are being perceived, let's say. So if this is, right ahead of me is azimuth 0, and maybe Andy's at some angle. Now I'm talking just a horizontal spread this way, and so maybe we would take his sound and put it at that angle. Seems like a sensible solution to try. But there's actually some potential problems here, some things that might come up. So, for example, if you get this, it depends on how you do this calculation. So, for example, I'm sitting at a laptop that's about, let's say, 15, 16 degree inch screen, and let's call it 1.5 feet from the screen. Maybe where I would perceive the visual angle if I was watching this conversation between myself and Andy is, maybe it's 5 degrees off center, maybe it's 10 degrees off center. If the audio is positioned, let's say, 30 degrees off center, I might see a lot of, or I might experience some really good spatial audio conversational benefits that we've seen in previous research, but there might be this element of distraction or uncomfortableness that I'm going, I see people at this narrow angle, but I hear them from this wide angle, and I don't know what to do about that. And similarly, if I, say that I put the audio narrow, where I think that really I'm only about 5 or 10 degrees off center, and that's where I'm going to put those speakers. And now maybe I've got a nice audio-visual mismatch for my scenario, but maybe those audio streams are just too close to really experience some of the benefits that we expect from separating, speech signals in that way. So that really gets into the heart of the investigation here that we're presenting. So what's a good audio width for remote video users when you're in video calls? I'll call ideal is a loaded word, but let's say we're looking at the ideal wideness here for the audio stage, where are we spreading these speech signals for people in the call with us. And we want to get a sense of how people rate the spatial audio ordering and how well they rate the correspondence between where they hear sounds coming from and where they see the corresponding visuals. And we're also going to try to get some gauge on how well they can identify a event that happens in one of those streams and how confident they are in that answer. And also in how much work they think it takes to do this, if that changes at all as we change the width of the audio stage. So we did this experiment. I'll get into the details, but the general format is we asked participants to watch some videos that simulate video calls on their own laptops using their own headphones. After each video, we asked them some questionnaires that get at these general things that we're interested in. Sort of related to how people, join a remote video call. Again, they join with their own laptop, their own headphones. So we were able to have this study be totally remote, self-driven. So we didn't sit anyone down in a room to do this. And this is sort of the general format of what we asked people to do. So we had participants watch these videos of conversations. So 8 of these conversations simulated short conversations between 2 other people in a video call. So we had speakers positioned left to right. So here's Dimitra on the left, who I can see in the conference room, and another intern who's not here right now, Justin, on the right. Thank them both for being great conversationalists in these conversations. And so participants will watch these videos, and the conversations will either be monophonic, so both of their speech signals will be right in the middle, which is typical for most video conferencing calls these days. They might be plus or minus 5 degrees off center. This is, perhaps a just noticeable difference. It may correspond to the actual visual separation in some cases. In some cases, it will be widened so that they'll be at 15 degrees off center, and in some cases, it'll be either 30 degrees off center. Each participant will watch 8 two-speaker videos and receive each of these conditions twice. And the conversations in these videos are semi-improvised. It's based off of a scheme from some previous research on simulating teleconference calls and evaluations, that having this kind of semi-improvised, either very conversational or in some cases a problem-solving, 2 people collaborating, that helps things not feel so scripted. So we just sort of adapted this protocol. So that's 8 videos. Oh, and they're all about 2 or 3 minutes. And then there's also 4 additional videos that simulate calls between 4 speakers. So this came from an internal data set from a previous spatial audio study. Again, thank you to Andy and John and Sasha if they're here. So this is an internal data set. We have 4-person calls. These are fully scripted. And these will be treated in a similar way. So one video, participants will receive in mono, and there's 4 additional treatments here, where these treatments now are these are showing how wide the audio stage will be essentially. So in the second treatment, the far left will be 15 degrees off center to the left, and the far right will be 15 degrees off center to the right. And the two speakers in the center will be 7.5. And then so one will be as wide as 30 on either side, and one will be as wide as 50 on either side. These videos, so here they all are presented in wide view. The reason for this, so in most video call systems, a 4-person conversation you probably would see rendered as a 2x2 grid. So you'll get horizontal separation, but also vertical separation. Here, we're only interested in the horizontal separation, but the hope is that seeing user preferences in this view will help us understand perhaps not just what to do with the audio, audio positioning for 4 people, but what will listeners accept in width as more people are in calls and you start to actually see this, 4 people spread across horizontally in some ways. So that's kind of the thing that we're gauging here. And yeah, after each video, there will be a questionnaire. So the questions come from P1300, which is a telecommunications standard for evaluating teleconferencing systems, particularly those that use spatial audio. NASA TLX is a task index, self-reported. How hard is this task? And again, we will ask them to identify which stream had a background distraction and how confident they are in that answer. And so these are all respectively to try to get a sense of, one, the user ratings of the spatial audio, the ordering, and the correspondence between the audio and the video positions, the listening effort, and some metric of stream identification. Can you identify which audio stream something happened in? And additionally, there is a final questionnaire with some free-form feedback that I'll present some results to. But actually, there's some pretty illuminating and interesting responses. So this is the form of the study. You will see these questions, the specific questions that were asked, but hopefully the format of the study makes sense. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask. And if they pop up as we go along, no problem. So we did this study. We had 23 participants. About half were between 25 and 34 years old. General range was from 18 to 54 years old. We had 16 men participate, 6 women, 1 non-binary or gender diverse individual. These were all Microsoft internal employees, so 16 said that they use video conferencing every day, and the remaining use it 2 or 3 times a week. So, as expected, video call experts in this study. Now, 15 said that they were either not at all or somewhat familiar with spatial audio, with 15 saying they're very familiar, and 3 self-reported experts. So now we'll move into a good section of looking at how people responded to each of these questions per treatment and per number of speakers. What I would like to do, actually, I will go back and revisit what the questions are and talk about the results, but I want to explain what these graphs, basically there's going to be a lot of graphs that all have the same format, and so I want to explain how to read them, what they're showing, so that if there's any questions, we can address that, and then I'll go and we can talk about the trends, but I want to make sure everyone has a sense for what's being displayed before we go into the particulars. So for every question, we're going to see 2 graphs, one for 2 and one for 4, depending on the number of speakers. And the x-axis is going to show us the audio treatment. So it's either going to be what happens when the audio is mono, or one of the 3 spatial conditions, which will depend on the number of speakers. So for 2 speakers, it will be separation 5 degrees off center, 15 degrees off center, 30 degrees off center. That'll be the x-axis. The y-axis is going to be the response to the question. It's going to show a distribution for each group. This is like whisker plot with like median and quantiles and outliers. Up top, you will see a p-value from a Bruner-Langer test that is the non-parametric test that will just say how likely is it that there is a significant difference in all groups. So it's, if you're familiar with ANOVA, it's sort of like ANOVA, but it's not non-parametric. So if there's a very statistically significant value, it means that all groups are not the same. And then there are pairwise comparisons that are done between groups using the Wilcox rank test with Bonferroni corrections, another non-parametric comparison. So these will tell us if there's statistical differences between groups, and in most cases it won't actually be important to actually look at all pairwise comparisons. We're just going to talk about the trend. So sorry if that was belabored, but there's just going to be about 10 or so of these things, and so I feel it's important to make sure everyone knows how to read them. But feel free to ask if there's any questions. Okay, so results time. So first of all, this question here is directly from the P1300. Again, that's the teleconferencing guide for evaluating teleconferencing systems, in particular that use spatial audio. So this is directly one of their questions that they recommend. How adequate is the spatial ordering of the voices that you hear, from very inadequate to very adequate? In the case of videos with two speakers, we see that there is a very significant difference between groups. We see that the rating, the adequacy rating, we'll say, tends to increase with additional spread, and that perhaps the increase plateaus, so to speak, in the third audio condition, where speakers are separated by 15 degrees off center in either direction. So, moving from this third group to this fourth group where voices are separated additionally, there's no significant difference between groups. And the most significant difference is between mono and this case where it's separated plus minus 15 degrees. In the case of four speakers, we see a similar trend. Very significant difference between groups. The trend tends to be upward. Most significant difference now between mono and the stage where the speakers are spread between 30 degrees to the left, 15 degrees to the left, 15 degrees to the right, 30 degrees to the right. Moving as far wide as 50-degree spread, there's no noticeable benefit. So similarly, we asked a modified version of that question. Now this is asking directly, how adequate is the relationship between the location of the speakers on the screen and the location of their voices? So it's a similar question, but it's now asking directly about the audio-visual correspondence. And generally, we see very similar trends here. So, two speakers, very significant difference, general increase as audio width continues. Here we can see very significant differences in the 15-degree case or the 30-degree case over mono. No significant difference between them. Not to jump too far ahead, but one way to interpret these results is that you could separate voices by 15 degrees and get some benefit in how people rate this particular metric, and no more. Additional spread doesn't see you gain a statistically significant difference. And there's a similar result now for four speakers. So, I'll not to repeat the same. The trend is the same, I'll say. So at least in terms of how people rate, this is how it tends to look. You go from mono to whatever the third audio group is in either the 2 or 4 case to see the highest general increase in ratings. The audio stage in the 4-person videos is a little wider than the 2-person video. So here it's 30 degrees in either direction versus 15 degrees. We asked people to identify which audio stream had a background distraction noise. So we would ask them, which participant had some video dependent sound, and with an option of picking either one of the 2 or one of the 4. So in the case of 2 speakers, what we see is that there's a large benefit to basically wide spatialization. Now, this is in some ways more of a sanity check. So what should be noted is distraction sounds are inserted into these videos after recording, which means that there's no content in the videos that either in the audio streams themselves or nothing in the conversation that suggests that there's a sound happening. So in the case of monophonic audio, this is in the case of 2 speakers, this is a coin flip. Which person had the distraction sound? The expectation is that about half the time you get it right. And what spatial audio gives you in this case is, can you hear that it's coming from the left or right? So all that is to say, here we see, good benefits at people can positively identify when streams are 15 or 30 degrees off center. This is an expected result, I should say. So it's good to see this. This isn't like groundbreaking or anything. We see a similar trend in the 4-speaker videos, but they're actually there's a difference that requires explaining. So similarly in 4 speakers, in mono, now it's a quarter of the time you guess right. So there's no hope there basically. And the trend is that people have an easier time identifying the stream as the width increases up to the stage where things are now separated by 30 degrees on either side at the widest. It appears in the data on first glance that there's actually a performance degradation as you go to the widest stage. This is actually, but this is unfair. So what happened here is there is a little problem in the study that we might be able to correct with further iterations if necessary. So there's 4 videos. In 3 of the videos, the distraction sound actually ended up coming from either the far left speaker or the far right speaker. And in one of the videos, the distraction sound was in the center right, which is harder to pinpoint, or at least that's the presumption. We actually ran multiple versions of the survey so that not everyone necessarily got the same video and treatment pair. Everyone received each treatment twice in the case of 2 speakers and once in the case of 4 speakers. But the idea was to try to avoid one, maybe one video has some issue that we didn't realize and we don't want to penalize one of those cases. So we had a random shuffle. And essentially, by oversight, in both versions of the study we ran, the 4-speaker video with the case where there's a wide stage for 4 speakers, where speakers are spread from 15 degrees or 50 degrees rather on either side. In both versions, got the video where the distraction sound comes from the center right. So all that is to say, that's the hardest one to pick out, and that's the one that this audio treatment always got. So I don't believe this result is what I'm saying. This is probably an unfair penalty that we would like to be able to correct. So take that with a caveat. Hope that explanation made sense. Let me know if it didn't. Because similarly, we also asked people how confident they were in picking their distraction stream. So here we see, so for 2 speakers, there's no problem. and we see pretty sensible results. So in the case of monophonic audio, you know, you're not very confident. And as the separation increases, you become more confident. This makes sense because in this case, again, all you're trying to do is tell left from right. And so confidence increases, you know, plateaus around 15 degrees, again, separation. And in the case of 4 speakers, we see this kind of a similar trend as the picking the distractor. So the confidence increases again as the spread gets wider, and then you know, interestingly, actually, the significance is not so bad on these, but visually it looks like there's a decrease in confidence in the widest stage. This is probably, again, because this is the hardest one to pick out. So naturally, we would expect people to be not as confident. Actually, the pairwise comparison between monophonic and the widest audio stage in this case is it's marginally significant without Bonferroni correction, but that's cheating. So with Bonferroni correction, it's not significant. So unfortunately, we can't. In both cases, we have to be careful about the distraction data for this widest audio stage. And again, we do have some plans to maybe run another version of the study to just try to correct this. So we also asked people to self-assess the mental and physical difficulty of the task based on the audio conditions. This comes from the NASA TLX. And this is more for due diligence. I'm just reporting we asked it, and I can show you what it looks like. But there's really not much signal. So the self-assessment of both how mentally difficult was the task, and then I know I'm not giving people a lot of time to read these, but also the physical difficulty. In both cases, we essentially see no noticeable difference. There's a marginally significant result for 2 speakers, but it's so marginal that I don't really trust it. So this particular line of questioning didn't give us a lot of signal. Now, also of interest, we have this. So after completing all the videos, there's also a final questionnaire where we ask 3 free text questions of all the participants. So please describe your overall experience. We ask how did they feel about the visual and audio correspondence? Did they ever feel like they matched or mismatched, or was it too narrow? Was it too wide? And then also we asked how different was their experience between videos with 2 speakers and 4 speakers. Now, these are all free text, but to try to get some kind of summary from this, I went through and tried to tally up some sentiments that were repeated in multiple answers. So this is in no way a full summary of all the responses, but this is some things that came up in multiple responses. So looking at the first question, overall experience. We had 4 participants say that they felt that the conversations were easier to follow when spatialized. We had 4 participants say that they preferred narrower spatialization over wider spatialization. Interestingly, with regards to that, and I wonder if these are, I haven't actually gone to check, but I wonder if some of these responses come from people who are experts or very familiar with spatial audio based on the language. But 3 participants said that they sometimes felt like the audio is hard panned, or they said, I didn't like the examples where you did hard panning. So if you're not familiar, hard panning would be in a stereo signal, you know, left and right. That means putting one signal in one ear and one signal in the other ear. And so people said, I didn't like the examples where you did that. This is interesting because we didn't do that, right? So what this kind of suggests, we did have separation of 30 degrees spatially or up to 50 degrees spatially, which is pretty wide. But hard panning, this isn't an exact correspondence, but it would be more akin to 90 degrees separation. this kind of suggests to me, and I experienced this anecdotally, that maybe people's perception of how wide something is off of center um, is is maybe not necessarily in line with reality sometimes, that it's easier for things to feel wider than they actually are. This is a hypothesis that I have, but I think this kind of shows up in the responses. With regards to how well the visual and audio corresponded, 9 participants said that sometimes it was too narrow, 7 said sometimes it was too wide. I think this suggests that listeners can perceive this basically. Whatever their own threshold is, they perceive that's too narrow for me, or they perceive that's too wide. That was kind of weird. And 3 participants said that the 2-person videos actually were often too wide, but that the 4-person videos were, often just right or never too wide was one of the responses. So this might suggest that as the number of speakers increases, people may be more willing to accept a wider audio stage, which sort of bears out in the results too. And finally, yeah, experience. So how did you experience a difference between 2 speaker videos versus 4 speaker videos? And 5 participants said that the spatialization was better for the 4-person conversations. 4 participants said that the spatialization with regards to the distractions, picking out which stream had a distraction, actually explicitly said that they could tell if it came from the left or right, but after that they just had to guess. And this is the small number, but there's only 2 responses, but I just found it too interesting to not include because they were almost identical. 2 participants said that they found spatialization more comfortable in the videos with 2 speakers, but more helpful in the videos with 4 speakers. I just thought that was an interesting thing, that 2 people made a difference between comfort and helpfulness. I don't know that there's anything strong I can say about that result other than it's interesting to me. Okay, so that's a lot of questions. That's a lot of results, right? What does this point towards, or what are trends that we might be able to learn from? And some of them I've kind of harped on a little bit, so it's probably obvious now. But I think we can use these to learn some things about audio stage width and user preference. So there is an increase in how people perceive the spatial ordering and the audio visual correspondence, and they all seem to plateau before our widest conditions, right? So that suggests that there probably is a limit to how wide we want to spatialize thing in terms of benefit, this particular benefit, I should say. And that, yeah, we have responses that say that users do perceive this difference between this is too narrow or this is too wide. So this is something that people do notice. With regards to the audio spread, or the width and stream identification, I think we have an idea that we have a similar trend of things kind of benefiting and plateauing, but we do have this big asterisk where we need to be careful, or I would, there's that problem with the widest condition for 4 speakers where I would like to be able to say this more strongly, but we actually need to do some fixing to make sure that we can say that this is definitely true. But we do have responses, and actually a little bit, like there's one graph I didn't show that sort of bears out this result, that the spatialization does help determine the hemisphere. It helps tell whether the sound is coming from the left or the right, but that the exact identification, at least for this particular task, may require something more. And finally, the width with regard to the number of interlocutors, or number of co-speakers, basically. The participants generally preferred the narrower audio stage for 2 speakers versus 4 speakers, and that shows up in both the data and the responses. And that there seems to be an indication from the free-form responses that the spatialization is better or more preferable, or a better experience with more speakers. So, yeah, conclusions, what does this mean for engineering video audio systems, or what might this point towards? We have our results, but also previous results that spatial audio can improve a user experience if it's done well. Done well might mean that there is this Goldilocks principle for how you position speakers, not too wide, not too narrow. That perception of how well things are positioned and being able to pick out things those benefits may plateau with increased wideness, so it might be better to err towards narrow, though not too narrow. And if you engineer a preferred audio with how wide do you want to spread your speakers, it may be the case that you want to have that actually be dynamic with the number of speakers. That said, there's still, of course, many open questions about spatial audio and video calls, some of them from this particular study. We asked users to use their own laptops that all have fairly similar screen size, but of course, remote users can also use large monitors. They may sit further or closer away that will give you a different visual perception. And there's a question of, does that change in visual perception change your preferences in audio? Of course, I believe now Apple FaceTime with AirPods has some form of head tracking. So as that becomes more common, do you change, do these parameters roughly stay the same if there's head tracking available, or do you need to actually change the way that you want to spatially position sounds? What can be done to better help localize voices in the center of the screen? Now here again, we're not talking about distraction sounds, so there's that caveat there that it's not necessarily that you can't tell who's speaking, but there does seem to be something about the hemisphere being helped, but maybe audio streams toward the center of the stage. There may be more we can do. So with that, I'd just like to thank again Hannes and Hong, the MSR Audio and Acoustics group, particularly Dimitra and Justin for helping me out with those videos. The Teams audio group, in particular Warren, who helped me with some offline spatialization issues. To Andy and John and Lev and the Malta group for helping us out with their material from previous studies and also with the survey design. Okay, thank you, everyone. We have time for questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. Are there any questions in the chat? Otherwise,
there's still a lot of discussion. But...
Okay. Well, if anyone wants to ask any question, please. I see John just raised his hand. Go ahead, John.
I'm waiting for Teams. I'm waiting for Teams to unmute.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Now we can.
So I had three really interesting work, but I had three methodological questions. First of all, I just wanted to confirm that although you referenced head tracking in the audio studies in previous work, this study, there was no head tracking. Correct?
That's correct.
Right.
That's
and
correct.
In fact, what was the method for spatialization? Did you use, was it just stereo panning, or did you use HRTF or?
HRTF. So yeah, binaural audio.
Okay, thanks. And then the real detail question, the spacing, I'm a little curious about something. You said, for example, when it was plus or minus 15, it sounded like the 4-person case were located at like minus 15, minus 7.5, plus 7.5, and plus 15. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But that means that they're not evenly spaced, that the two in the middle actually have a 15-degree space difference rather than the two on the outsides only have 7.5. Am I not understanding that correctly?
No, that's correct. We talked about that a little bit to try to see if there was a good way to have them be evenly spaced while also still respecting both this symmetry off center and also to maybe have a sense for having a correspondence between the being able to say something about the width between the 2-person and 4-person videos as well, right? So, and perhaps the answer is that just there. So there is a question of, you know, if participants prefer, let's say, the case of 15 degrees in the 2-person video, 2-person videos, then we want to have a stage that there's 15 degrees in the 4-person videos. And so, you know, perhaps, but then you have this unequal spacing issue. So essentially we were trying to see if we could come up with a good set for either, so that we could try to get overlapping audio stage widths and also the equal spacing. And in the end, we ended up just going more on the side of overlapping widths. But it is definitely a reasonable question that perhaps we could have used different parameters to try to get that a little better, because there is that not exactly equal spacing between everyone that you mentioned.
Also good to understand as a difference between the two studies that we've been talking about. But
yes.
Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess, yeah, to add to what Jeremy said, I guess one hope that we had was to maybe look into other ways of comparing a 2- and 4-speaker videos, and we were thinking that it might be easier if there are matching locations or some matching locations, which if we spread the 4-person videos evenly, then we have fewer overlaps between, fewer exact matches between the 2-speaker and the 4-speaker case. But arguably, one could say we could have used other we could have done the even spacing, or you could even argue our localization is actually more accurate towards the center and less accurate towards the sides. You might even want to put things closer to get, like, space it unevenly but compress it towards the middle. Like there's different ways of thinking about that, but we didn't want to. We picked one. We didn't want to go too deeply into that question of how you should actually arrange things once there's more than 2. But it's a fair point. It's something that we will have to think about more. I did have one maybe related question, and this is a little unfair because I could, of course, discuss that before this talk, but now. Do you think that was there any indication from anyone that you talked to, either in free form or maybe somebody sent you an email or chatted, that did anyone complain that no speaker was ever exactly in the middle? And do you think, and second part to that question is, do you think that just gut feeling, is it more important to have this kind of even symmetrical layout, or in the case where you have an even number of speakers, would it be good to have one at least be dead on and then have a few unevenly distributed on the sides?
Sure. So no one specifically said, I wish there had been some in the middle. There was at least one response with regards to videos with 2 speakers that said, you know, I'm pretty used to hearing mono these days after being remote for so long, and so it doesn't really bother me that they're mono, and I don't necessarily need the spatialization for 2 speakers, although it's better for 4 speakers. There was a comment that at least one that, you know, if the audio is off center and someone talks for a long time, right, then perhaps that can be a little annoying that you're hearing it from one side for so long. So that's not an explicit complaint about someone not being in the middle, but that is something that someone brought up. So that's a which you know is interesting to think about, because of course that's in some ways you could consider it a head tracking issue too, because if someone was speaking for a long time, you might turn your head to look at them and then they would be center. So I guess the answer is no one specifically complained about that, but there are comments that gesture towards scenarios where having someone in the center would be beneficial.
Yeah. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment that like one of the interesting contrasts between the other study that's kind of we've been working on in this domain is that in your study you're kind of in a uncontrolled setting, which is a little bit more like the application that you have in mind, the actual target scenario. And you mentioned the potential impact of screen size. I was curious whether you asked participants what their screen size was. So you have that data. You could potentially do something there. Was there any variation in it, or was it more or less just like everybody's on a 15-inch laptop these days or something?
It was mostly the 13 to 15, 16-inch. There were, I think, 2 people that said 20 inches, which I thought that's pretty big for a laptop, but maybe it exists, maybe someone didn't follow the instructions or something. But that seemed to generally be the range. Now, it is also, we'd have to go back and code it because that was just a free form text. So, some people said, oh, I think it's about 14. So because we specifically asked people to use their laptop screens, I don't think there's a lot of variation. Now, even then, that said, the difference between me sitting a foot from my laptop and 2 feet or 3 feet from my laptop is going to give me a very different visual perspective. So that's another uncontrolled element.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if there's maybe something at play here where like there's almost like a constancy effect where even though, yes, I see that I'm on a small laptop, I somehow I think of it as being a bigger stage because, I'm used to being in front of a larger display, or I just know that this is a meeting scenario where people are generally in a larger physical place than this tiny laptop shows me, right? And then somehow my brain accounts for that. And so maybe screen size is not as important as we think it is, and by that argument. I don't know.
I'm not sure. It's a very, very interesting question. I think very much not answered.
What do you think? How do you think the results might change if you, instead of rendering the headphones, you just render to a stereo pair on the built-in speakers on the laptop, for example?
So I have a suspicion that people will notice the binaural rendering a lot more than and they'll localize a lot better than what they would do over stereo.
Sorry, you're saying that they're going to do better with headphones?
Oh, with headphones versus laptops. Yeah, so the difference there is going to be that, and of course it depends on the laptop speakers, but there is a harder limit generally to where you can push the sound to. Now, granted, here we are talking about still fairly narrow audio stages, but in a stereo setup, right? If you hard pan, all right, in a headphone, it's way all the way over here. Over a laptop speaker, it's all the way in the right side of the laptop speaker, which, from where I'm sitting may only sound about 30 degrees to my right, So I think it just becomes a little more difficult too, not just with localization, but with it's easier to make assumptions about people wearing headphones than it is about people using loudspeakers either on a laptop or not. It's hard to tell what they're using.
Well, I mean, can you just can you just put it simply that with a pair of built-in laptop speakers, you can't really push the stage to be very wide. There are definite limits in terms of how wide you can make it.
Jeremy actually did a small scale test with open speakers. I was one of the guinea pigs in his test. So there was definitely a difference for me. I guess we didn't run he didn't run this kind of a detailed test.
Yeah.
With
this also for a future person, maybe I wasn't sure how much of this will maybe go in the final video, this Q&A portion. I was like dancing around. I don't know how much we want to talk about this. Yeah. So there are certainly things you can do beyond just stereo panning over open speakers that can help you get a wider audio stage than with just stereo panning. There is still a physical limit that is probably much shallower than using headphones.
Jeremy, I'm interested in the comment about hard panning. So sometimes even in reality, it is both ears, right? It's binauralized, but people still could feel like it's coming from one side or another. I wonder, can you see how many people have that feeling kind of in your feedback? Is there a good percentage or just very small?
Well, it's a little hard to make an assumption. I think so 3 people said it out of 23, but we also didn't ask it. So 3 people offered this, right? And also the fact that they said hard panning unprompted also makes me believe that they probably are people that have a lot of audio experience, which sometimes makes it so that you bring your own assumptions. So for example, this is a little different, but this is kind of the anecdotal evidence that I was bringing. So when I tried listening to sounds rendered at 30 degrees off center, even though I've done a lot of spatial audio work and I listened to it and I just thought, wow, that sounds really wide to me, and I could see that maybe, and I think that sometimes you don't notice that until you then make yourself listen to something at 50 and 70, and then you go, okay, yeah, that actually is 30, but when you just hear it unprompted, it sounds very wide. So I can very easily believe that someone who also has some audio experience could hear audio rendered at 30 degrees off center or maybe 50 degrees off center and just think, and especially if they know that they're doing a user study, they might just think, oh, they're trying to hard pan now, and don't do that. I didn't like that, even though there was no hard panning. Yeah.
A follow-up just to see how much this generalized HRTF, and I wonder these people have bigger heads, smaller heads, or more off since we're using the same one size fits all.
Yeah. I didn't collect that data.
You should measure everybody's circumference.
There's IRB issues with that. I'd have to ask.
All right. If there are no other questions, I don't see any hands raised. Is there anything on the chat?
Sorry. No, nothing in the chat.
Okay. Then I'd say let's thank Jeremy again for his talk. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for joining. If there are more follow-up questions about any of this, please direct them to Jeremy until the end of this week and myself after that, and we'll be happy to reply or comment or receive your feedback. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yes, thanks.